Hi, guys. Welcome back to Through the Darkness, a discussion and channel on trauma and stressor disorder and PTSD, unresolved trauma. My story, essentially. And what I'd like to cover tonight would be probably one of the more difficult topics that I get to talk to because it's very not only personal to me, but it also has a stigma and a stereotype attached to it as well, and that is my battle with alcoholism after the diagnosis of PTSD and during the process of developing PTSD. But I think it's very, very important because I think that there are a lot of people out there that may have a similar struggle, that may have a similar battle as to mine, that may be tied to some unresolved trauma in your life. And I just wanted to walk through my experience with alcoholism and what my journey looked like in hopes of encouraging you and giving you hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel. I am very proud and thankful that I have been sober for a few years. And surprisingly, my battle with alcohol really taught me a lot of very important life lessons. And just like PTSD and unresolved trauma and stressor disorder, out of every bad thing, I'm convinced that there can be good in it, depending on what your perspective is going to be. And throughout this series on Through the Darkness, it's all about moving through the darkness, not setting up camp in the darkness, not remaining in the darkness, not laying down in the darkness, not quitting in the darkness, but moving through the darkness. And that's very important when it comes to alcoholism as well. Alcohol, throughout the course of my life, played a very insignificant role up to the point that I started developing trauma and stressor disorder. I was not a drinker. I can tell you that I enjoyed having a beer or two. I can tell you that going all the way back to my college years, I was not looked upon as a drinker by any stretch of the imagination, and I know that my kids and family had never seen me intoxicated ever. And so alcoholism was really a shock to my system and is a very visceral reminder of how damaging unresolved trauma can be. I started using alcohol for self-medicating, which is normal because it works. And if I had to give you a visual or an analogy on what alcohol did for me, when you're struggling with unresolved trauma, there are a few main emotions that I was really, really struggling with that had completely taken over my quality of life. Fear and anxiety, put them together as one. Depression and anger and a hyper vigilance and just an over stimulus type of being, but four main pillars, and they were continually together, warring at each other all the time. And if you can picture four rocks closely clumped together, the best way for me to get normal life, which would look like space between those rocks, would be to put 4 to 6 beers between those rocks to create a little bit of space, a little bit of that feels better, a little bit of I can forget about the trauma, I can forget about the anxiety and the depression for a while. Alcohol works. It's a magical substance that works, but it will also kill you in the long run, which I learned the hard way. And that 4 to 6 beers every single night to create a little bit of normalcy in my life turned into 6 or 8 beers to create a little bit of normalcy, a little bit more space, and then 8 to 10 beers every single night. And my pattern was a very unique pattern. I didn't go out. I didn't socially drink. In fact, I avoided that. I would drink at night for the same period of time in the evening, and I would drink until the hurt and the pain and the anxiety and the depression started to lift. And that space between those warring rocks was big enough for me to actually feel and be a part of life again. But unfortunately, with alcohol, when the alcohol is gone, when it wears off, when you wake up the next morning, you're left to deal with that unresolved trauma. And for me, at the time that I became dependent on alcohol, it was unfortunate because I was not diagnosed with PTSD. And part of that was my responsibility. Because another thing that alcohol will make you do, because there is a stigma to it, a social stigma, I would say, is there was quite a bit of lying going on when I was talking to the healthcare providers, when I would go in and talk about my symptoms that I was struggling with, like anxiety and depression and hypervigilance. And I think the SEALs are flying in a team right now to help me out with this particular episode. Looks like they may be swinging around to fast rope in, dump in and obey. I'm just kidding. It's quite the distraction though, isn't it? Getting back to the lying part, I wasn't truthful about my drinking. When I was asked about my drinking, I remember always saying the 3 to 4 beers periodically. It would make me feel better. And in all reality, it was more than that, and it was all the time, and it started to morph into something that I no longer could control. It was controlling me. So some of the red flags that were there for me that I'd like you to be aware of for yourself, for your own healing, recovery, finding help, things that people might point out: drinking every single day, being worried about the quantity of alcohol that you have around, or if there'll be alcohol at wherever you're going that will be available for you, being sneaky about it. A real classic example of this is when I was together with friends that I love, guys that I love dearly in my life. When everybody was ready to go to bed, I would act like I wanted to go to bed as well, and sure enough, I would get up very quietly and I would sit around the fire or sit outside on the deck or wherever we might be, and finish the job and have a few more to make myself feel better. And those are patterns that are just not healthy. Also, if you start to see that the quantity go up like I did, instead of it being 1 or 2 beers and being really in really good shape and relaxed and doing that very, very periodically, that becomes a problem when it starts turning into larger quantities, and doing it by yourself as well. The doctors were a little bit mystified when I would talk to them about what my drinking looked like, and they would ask me, usually repeatedly, you do this by yourself, like you're not part of a social group that enjoys drinking and drinks too much? And the answer was no when I started telling the truth, because I was self-medicating, because I had a legitimate brain injury that needed medication. It just so happened that alcohol is the complete incorrect medication, regardless of how effective it is. I was using that to medicate my brain injury. How it affected my family is something that I like to talk about as well. Unfortunately, it does drive a wedge, a very big wedge between the relationship of a significant other, whether it be a girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, especially if the other person does not have the problem of alcoholism. And I should have lost my marriage over it. I deserved to lose my marriage over it because it was ridiculous. you and I both know, I knew before I became an alcoholic how incredibly annoying people that drank too much are, period. They're just absolutely annoying. They are stupid. They say stupid things. They do stupid things. And unfortunately, they do all of these stupid things in front of people that are not stupid. And it really is a thing that hurts. You bring kids into the equation, and the memory that kids have, even though I wasn't an abusive person at all, the things that I would say or not be able to say really did matter. And I want to give you an example of something that was very hurtful in my lifetime. It was somebody that I looked up to that was an incredible person in my life, and still is just the pillar of example of an example of the man that I want to be. And this particular person, I still remember when I was a young boy, came home from a night out and had all of these unbelievably wonderful things to say to me. Could not stop talking about how great I was. And the entire time that these things were being said, words were being slurred, reeked of alcohol. And I remember vividly feeling like this person isn't saying these things to me, the alcohol is saying these things to me, and how detrimental and how hurtful that is. So be aware of that, because that's very, very damaging as well. With PTSD and trauma and stressor disorder, a lot of times your self-worth may be struggling, and I challenge you to think of people beyond yourself when you attack an issue with alcohol. It's worth it to other people to have the person back that you were created to be. And that person that you were created to be is absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. And all alcohol does is mask that person from being who you were created, specifically, fearfully, and wonderfully made to be. And I use the example of this beautiful gem, and you can see that this gem, under the influence of alcohol, this gem with an alcohol problem, is represented by black marker. It hides the true beauty of the person that you are called to be. The beauty of alcoholism, if there is one, is that it is completely something that you are able to overcome. I'm telling you that as being somebody who's overcome alcoholism, that was able to beat it with professional help, but it's going to take a little bit of work on your part. So instead of looking like this and sounding like this to people, we quickly get back to exactly the person that you were supposed to be, that you are deep down inside, without the chemicals, without the injuries that you sustained, without the anxiety, without the depression. And this is what I wish for you, is to get to this particular point. That first step, I talked about it in an earlier video, was very difficult for me, driving up to a treatment facility and making that walk across the parking lot to go in was probably one of the lower points of my life. Just completely defeated, not knowing what was going on with me. I had not been diagnosed with PTSD at that particular point. I knew where all of the detox centers were because I was scared to death what it would be like to try to quit cold turkey. I had read up on alcoholism. I had read that the fatality rate of alcoholism, if gone untreated, is 100%. It will kill you. The numbers were already showing it in my medical background. I had developed type 2 diabetes. My blood pressure was ridiculous. I had a doctor say, you are going to die from this. And by the grace of God, and encouragement from those around me. Not scorning, not condemning, but encouragement from those around me, I was able to finally overcome alcohol. And to tell you that I don't miss it, I would be lying. And I will tell you that I do miss parts of it, and I will tell you that there's a level of resentment as well that I have to work on regularly. And that resentment being that I won't be able to enjoy a long neck with buddies after a successful fishing trip, or around the campfire, or a glass of wine with my wife any longer. So the resentment is very deep on one part, but at the same time, my wife got her husband back, my kids got their dad back, my friends got their friend back, my parents got their son back, my brother and sister got their brother back, and you can just keep going. And when you look at how much more important those things are in the big scope of things, and in what your legacy will be, what legacy that you leave for other people, it far outweighs any resentment or being bummed out that your life is going to be different now that you are sober, and you will be more healthy. It just so happens that today I had my A1C checked, and my A1C is below diabetic, well within the safe range, which is just amazing, with no drugs, no pharmaceutical intervention, just quitting abusing alcohol and starting to take care of myself physically is what it took. I want you to remember this as well. It's a lie from the other side that taking that walk or admitting that you have a problem is a low point, even though it feels like a low point. It's actually incredibly courageous. It is incredibly bold. It is incredibly empowering to face a giant like alcoholism and to ultimately conquer that. I just told a doctor the other day that alcoholism and PTSD I would like to have as patches on my shoulder, as two things that are known to take people out permanently, that I can walk proudly and I can walk with my shoulders back, that I overcame them, and that I'm at a point where I can start helping other people overcome the same thing, and that's extremely rewarding to me. So that's my story on being an alcoholic. I'm very glad to be clean. I'm glad to share that with you, even though it's very personal and very difficult to share at times, all the time actually, but you guys are worth it. And I just want you to keep this in mind as I close. One day, somebody in your life that means a lot to you will come up to you, either in their words or their actions, and they will say to you straight to your eyeballs, "Thank you for taking the steps to get sober and being such a great part of my life. Thank you for doing that for us," and I challenge you to do the same thing. Remember, it's simply walking through the darkness. We're not setting up camp in the darkness. We're not standing in the darkness. We're not laying down in the darkness. We're not making our home in the darkness. We are walking through the darkness and trauma and stressor disorder and unresolved trauma. Make sure you click and subscribe. I can't wait to meet with you again. Thanks for being with me. And I can't wait to see you next time on Through the Darkness. See ya.